Live, love Africa. What's your excuse for not coming? Please subscribe.
Hello, I'm Dynast Amir.
Greetings, everyone. It is Dynast Amir, Search for Uhuru. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we get started, make sure you go to dynastamir.com. Again, make sure you go to dynastamir.com. Buy some merchandise. This is the African Spirituality Roll Call shirt. Also, I am an author, so while you're there, buy some books. Not just one book, but each one of your friends and family members, they need to have a book written by me. So while you're there, buy some books as well. Make sure you join our email list. Again, join our email list so you can stay up to date in regards to what's going on with Dynast Amir. Like, share, and subscribe to the content. Again, like, share, and subscribe to the content. We would really appreciate your guys' support. And Patreon. Join our Patreon. Patreon, search for Uhuru. Again, join our Patreon. Support Black media so we can continue to share our narrative and tell our own story. So today's topic, Africans are starting to have second thoughts about that Chinese money. They're starting to regret taking out these high interest Chinese loans. And I'm going to read this article. If you see some of the purchases that were made with these Chinese loans, you'll be scratching your head. So let's jump right into it. This is off of Bloomberg. Deepak Patel can still recall the dizzying grandeur of his 2003 visit to Beijing's cavernous Great Hall of the People. The rows of stern guards, all the same height. The state dinner that included stewed shark. Oh, that sounds good. Stewed shark fin. That sounds good. I gotta have some of that. And bird's nest soup. That sounds good too. But I miss my agouti. When I go back to Cote d'Ivoire, I'm going to get some agouti. I love agouti. And the People's Liberation Army Band playing songs from Patel's native Zambia, even singing in one of the African country's scores of dialects. As Zambia's Minister of Commerce at the time, Patel had joined the delegation to cement ties and crucial secure financing for big-ticket infrastructure initiatives. Now, Zambia has all these natural resources. Again, Zambia has all of these natural resources. And you want me to believe that, and this is not just Zambia. This is the same story. This is the same story for all African countries. We have all these natural resources. And you want me to believe that we do not have the ingenuity to flip these resources in order to fund our own projects. Again, you want me to believe that we do not, Black people, African people, that we do not have the ingenuity to flip these resources to fund our own projects. Big ticket infrastructure initiatives. While most delegates were eager to accept anything they could get for projects such as a hydropower dam and a 50,000 seat soccer stadium. Okay, stop the show. Can someone name one soccer player for Zambia? Can somebody tell me when Zambia has fielded a competitive soccer team that's made it to the World Cup? What do you need a 50,000 seat stadium for? What do you need a 50,000 seat soccer stadium for if you are not fielding competitive soccer teams? Patel urged caution. My view was that we needed to build a strategic partnership and think it through, he says, but I was one voice in the cabinet. His warning went unheeded, and Zambia started to take out loans from Chinese banks for airports, take out loans from Chinese banks for airports, hospitals, housing projects, and the roads connecting them. We can't even build our own roads. We need a loan from a Chinese bank to build basic infrastructure, as including roads. Chinese credit has grown to about a third of Zambia's external debt. Wow. Which has surged sevenfold over the past decade, forcing the government this year to ask creditors to reschedule loans. Patel, now a real estate investor, is challenging in court the legality of billions in foreign money Zambia has borrowed without what he says was required consent from Parliament. Nobody other than the government knows the terms, he says. The government says it didn't need parliamentary approval. Okay. Patel is among a growing number of African activists and policymakers questioning the deluge of Chinese credit, some $150 billion in 2018. According to researchers at Johns Hopkins University, that has fueled a debt crisis aggravated by the new coronavirus. Nigerian lawmakers are reviewing Chinese loans they say were unfavorable. Activists in Kenya are demanding the government disclose the terms of Chinese credit used to build a 292-mile railway. And Tanzanian President John Magufuli calls an agreement his predecessors made with Chinese investors to build a $10 billion port and economic zone, a deal only a madman would sign. Guys, I want to look up the yearly GDP of Tanzania right quick. Let's look this up real quick. Yearly GDP of Tanzania. Let's see here. $62 billion. Okay, so $62 billion is the yearly GDP of Tanzania. So what you're trying to tell me, you wanted to finance a port that makes up about, I guess that would be roughly, guys, excuse my math, what, 20%? Let's see here. We'll say 15 or 20% of the yearly GDP of Tanzania. You wanted to spend $10 billion on one project that was roughly 10 to 15% of Tanzania's GDP. Who does that? I mean, guys, help me out here. In fact, that's more than, yeah, it's about 15%, 15, 20%, 15% roughly. Who sits down and says, okay, I'm going to sign off on this. This sounds like a great idea. Who is running these? Who's really running these countries? I mean, I think we know who, but who sits down at a table and says, I'm going to sign off on a loan for one project that is roughly 10% of our yearly GDP? 10 to 15% of our yearly GDP. I mean, think about that. In fact, that's more like 20%. I don't know, but it was a bad deal. It was a bad deal. Terrible deal. All right, let's go back to the article. While it will be tough for cash-starved African governments to win many concessions, a wave of looming defaults possess the biggest test ever for China's influence in the region. This has the potential to produce the most profound change in relations since China became a major economic player on the continent, says Chris Alden, an international affairs professor at the London School of Economics. African governments and society are increasingly asking China to come up with answers to this problem. Chinese lending to Africa dates at least to the 1960s when Mao Zedong channeled arms and training to rebels fighting for independence from European colonial powers. The support was limited because China was as poor as many African countries. Do you know at one time Nigeria was giving places like Singapore and Saudi Arabia, Nigeria was loaning them money? From my understanding, Nigeria was loaning countries like Singapore and countries like Saudi Arabia money. Now, African domestic workers go to these countries and are treated as slaves. We went from loaning them money, helping them build up their economy, helping fund infrastructure. Now, Africans go there as domestic workers and are treated as slaves. But it has since grown into an economic superpower in need of new markets, raw materials, and seeking to boost its global political standing. In the past 2 decades, Beijing has handed out loans to developing countries at a speed and scope not seen since the U.S. financed Marshall Plan in Europe after World War II. In Africa, Beijing was eager to fill the vacuum left when U.S. and European interests in the continent waned following the end of the Cold War. Sorry about that. Governments there were hungry for loans not tied to austerity programs imposed by Western financial institutions, and China was quick to approve credit, with scant concern about the money going to regimes accused of corruption or human rights violations. For China, as the newest power on the block, the only region of the world that was uncontested was Africa, says Gode Moore, Liberia's former Minister of Public Works, now a senior fellow at the Center of Global Development in Washington. When people complain about Chinese loans, it's not as if most African countries have a plethora of options. The only option for Africa is to industrialize and take the resources and make and create and process and complete it. Take our natural resources, right, and process our own natural resources on the continent, so we will have the finished product. That's the only option. We have to industrialize. There's no reason why chocolate from Cote d'Ivoire or Ghana should be going to Hershey's, Pennsylvania, and then coming back to Ghana or Cote d'Ivoire sold as a Hershey's bar, marked up 1,000%. Should be no reason for that. No reason a diamond should leave the Congo and go to Tiffany's, then come back to the Congo, marked up 1,000%, 20,000%. Again, we have to process our own natural resources so we can sell the finished product. That's the only option. Let's see here. It's hard to miss China's footprint in Africa. In tiny Guinea-Bissau, the exit signs in a government building are written in Chinese characters. In Mozambique, Chinese money paid for a 2-mile-long suspension bridge, the longest on the continent, that links the capital with beach resorts in neighboring South Africa. China helped foot the bill for Senegal's Museum of Black Civilizations, which until recently included Chinese art in its exhibit. So I guess they pulled the Chinese art out. It's become the largest financer of infrastructure in Africa, with the likes of the China Export-Import Bank and the China Development Bank funding a fifth of big projects, according to consulting firm Deloitte. To guarantee a quarter of that debt, African countries have effectively mortgaged future earnings from exports of commodities such as oil, cocoa, and copper. While loans by private investors from around the world still make up more than half of Africa's external public debt, Germany's Kiel Institute for the World Economy says China has lent more than the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Club of Paris, a group of wealthy countries combined. And many loans aren't made public, prompting suspicions that Africa's debt to China is bigger than estimated. Wow. The Kiel Group says as much as half of all Chinese lending to developing countries, or about $200 billion, hadn't been reported to the IMF and World Bank as of 2016. Why would it need to be reported anyway to these entities? The Chinese loans have drawn parallels to the lending boom of the 1970s that led to a crippling debt crisis across the developing world a decade later. We'll see a wave of defaults, says Christopher Trebek, an author of the Kiel study. It's just a question of whether it will be a huge wave or a small wave. Non-disclosure clauses mean many loans escape public scrutiny, raising fears of money ending up in the pockets of corrupt officials or middlemen. A Hong Kong businessman known as Sam Pa, believed to have brokered various multi-billion-dollar deals in Africa, was detained in 2015 as part of an anti-corruption campaign in China. Pa's opaque business empire, in part financed by Chinese state-run banks, is still being unwound by prosecutors. If there is so much secrecy around Chinese lending, there must be something illegal, says Khalifa, an activist demanding the Kenyan government provide details on debt from China used to fund a rail link from the port of Mombasa to the capital, Nairobi. Wow, so I could catch a train from Nairobi to Mombasa. Ooh. The Trump administration has accused China of loading, who cares what the West says, of loading poor countries with unpayable debt. I mean, this is the same thing America did, but then America was sending their hitmen. The West was sending, the West will give you a loan, steal all your resources, send in their hitmen. I mean, now they want to act like they're on higher ground. You know, the West wants to act like they're on higher moral ground than China. The Trump administration has accused China of loading poor countries with unpayable debt to snatch up prized assets and boost its clout with vulnerable governments. I mean, if America or the West in general wasn't involved or didn't play a role in the assassination of Thomas Sankara, Patrice Lumumba, Africa wouldn't be in the situation that they're in now. So, you know, let's stop with this. We're on higher moral ground. But some researchers say fears of Chinese predatory lending are exaggerated. China hasn't seized property or used courts to enforce debt payments. According to a study by the China-Africa Research Initiative at Johns Hopkins, the study's authors say the most frequently cited examples of what awaits developing countries that default on Chinese loans. Sri Lanka's sale of a majority stake in a port to a Chinese company in 2017 was a privatization and not a debt for equity swap, as reported by some media. Faced with growing criticism and a slowing economy, China has become more cautious. Its multi-billion-dollar Belt and Road Initiative, aimed at expanding commercial ties around the world, has tightened oversight of projects and is now gauges a country's capacity to repay before approving credit. Annual loan commitments have fallen from a peak of almost $30 billion in 2016 to $8.9 billion in 2018, Johns Hopkins says. Chinese President Xi Jinping has vowed to cancel a small portion of loans to governments in Africa, I don't believe it, and called on state-run banks to rework commercial debt owed by borrowers in the region. Debt service on Chinese lending accounts for 60% of all bilateral debt, principal, and interest payments due to this year from the 73 countries eligible for an 8-month suspension offered by the group of 20 leading economies, the World Bank says. It may be easier for African countries to gain debt relief from China than from commercial bondholders, according to Deborah Brottingham, who co-authored the Johns Hopkins study, which examined more than 1,000 Chinese loans to the continent. Let's see here. We're almost done. While private investors have sued countries over defaults and workouts can entail years of negotiations, Chinese lenders don't have a lot of leverage over borrowers, and there's little evidence of penalties for non-payment. China has written off $3.4 billion and restructured or refinanced about $15 billion of debt in Africa over the past decade, Brottingham says. We don't see a lot of options for Chinese lenders, she says. They can't send in gunboats. You sure they can't send in gunboats? You sure? You sure about that? Even with some relief, Africa, facing its worst recession ever and with few other sources of fresh loans, will likely remain deeply indebted to China for decades. Zambia still hasn't paid off the Mao-era to Zara Railway, a 1,860-kilometer line built in the 1970s to haul copper to the Port of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. The railways, China's first foreign aid project, intended to circumvent white minority-ruled Rhodesia in South Africa, is in deep disrepair, operating at a fraction of its original capacity with few working locomotives. That says Patel, the former Zambian minister, should serve as a note of caution, and the railway never met its goals and paid back on the investment. You would have thought the government would have learned from that lesson. He says, if you borrow for projects that have hardly any economic return, then it becomes a liability. What do you guys think? What do you guys think? So, yeah, just terrible deals. And now African leaders are starting to regret them. So until next time, family, Dynasty Amir, search for Huru. You know, leave your thoughts in the comment section. Till next time, family, peace.
Just left Guida, headed to Lomé. I'm in my limousine, my nice limousine, headed to Lomé as we speak. Got to go to the frontier. Just left Guida, Benin. Love Guida, Benin. I'm missing already. So I'll keep you guys posted.